think is the most valuable resource these days? Precious metals, clean water, energy. I'll tell you about the world where people and their attention became the most valuable resource. The world in which large corporations, media holdings, KOLs are fighting for exactly that. How is our attention being exploited, and the ways our cognitive brain functions are being hacked, and how big businesses manipulates and influences our emotions? We'll try to understand how nowadays we lost the ability of simply being idle, and why such natural events of life like having a meal or falling asleep is accompanied by online content consumption. And importantly, what makes us want to consume and buy more? What do you think of when you hear the phrase, "We submit to the power of things that are not created by us"? I'm talking about natural phenomena and the laws of physics. We did not invent the summer heat or winter cold, nor did we create the Newton's law. We simply understood, discovered how it all works. But whether we like it or not, we obey these laws. If you're watching this video around noontime, you managed to spend at least an hour or even more interacting with your phone. And perhaps you did not even notice this. According to media researchers, you will be online for at least another 4 hours until the end of the day. If you're under 24 years old, the figure will be an hour and a half longer. This is more than a quarter of our time. And if you subtract sleep, then more than a third. The internet and digital content, including this video, are not summer rain or winter snow. All this was created and continues to be created by men every second. But there is nothing bad to it. This is our choice. Therefore, we submit to it voluntarily. Many people today think that we are living in the most liberal time in our history, the time of freedom, including freedom of choice and decisions. The borders of most countries are open. We decide for ourselves what to wear, where to work, what to eat for breakfast, and what series to watch after work. But all this is one big illusion. Never before has it been so easy to follow, observe, and know a person, what he or she wants. In the 21st century, our thoughts, experiences, and even intentions are controlled like never before. And almost any type of data information about us is legally tracked and sold. And this is not a rant of a person with persecutory delusion, but a reality that many refuses to accept. Meet Harry. He works as a dispatcher at the busiest airport in the world, through which every year almost 1 million planes pass through. The task of Harry and his colleagues is to coordinate the following process: track flying objects on radar, keep in touch with crew, and immediately correct the course of actions to prevent a tragedy. Such work on the floor is, to put it mildly, stressful. Annually, the lives of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people pass through his hands. What happens when an air traffic controller loses focus was shown in the series of Breaking Bad. The terrible scene was based on a real tragedy of 1986. Why did we decide to start with this air traffic controller? Well, the main resource in his work is attention, the key term of today's video. Our whole life is based on attention. In fact, this is a kind of filter with the help of which we select what is important and what is not. If you're watching a YouTube video in the background, then your attention is now riveted on your work, to what you prepare or to what you are doing at the same time listening or watching this video. And if I ask you to look at the screen now, then you have probably thought about food, about a specific one, a dish like this burger, about food in general, or about whether it is a dummy or not. Now it will be a very dirty trick. Note how often you blink. We didn't think about it all day because it's our innate reflex until you have brought this to your attention. Attention is something without which none of our life decisions can be made. So logically, we understand that if we want to influence how a person will act, we need to influence what is in his focus. Let's let's take a closer look at how modern corporations, advertisers, and media fight for our attention. What buttons are pressed and how classical conditioning is being deployed. But to do so, let's understand the works of the first institution which successfully subjugated human attention. And this, of course, is religion. In polytheism, attention from the person was scattered between different objects. Each realm has its own deity. If Scott was sick, he made a sacrifice to Velis. He wanted to protect his future family, worship the god. In monotheism, when God was one, it worked differently. All the attention of the believer is focused on one creator. For that, God is omnipresent. He is in everything, and importantly, he made it clear that everyone is to live according to the rules that he established. Therefore, Christian theologians since ancient times proclaim that you need to pray tirelessly throughout your life. How exactly did religion hold people's attention? The first is ritualism. Thanks to daily prayers from an early age, a habit, a behavioral pattern is formed. Such rituals are understandable to you and you are free to navigate within it. Then the impact on emotions. Here we have everything. Majestic cathedrals that take your breath away, sacred texts which amaze with their depth, services and other bright events, weddings, funerals, confessions, regularity, emotionality, consistency. Education in Europe until the Middle Ages revolved around church. It had a monopoly. The religious monopoly reached its peak and began to sag. Then Johannes Gutenberg would figure out how to print books, and not only church books, but universities would open and gradually will become alternative centers of knowledge about how everything works. And then the scientist approach begins to dominate over the religious. And when, in addition to books, this first mass media appeared, cheap printing, newspapers, telegraphs, the war for attention has entered a hot phase. Attention from means turned into the number one goal. The owners of the newspaper, the first media moguls, knew very well what and how the church did with the information and began to do that same way to sell as many newspapers as possible and capture even more attention. A real revolution here was made by this man in a hat. His name is Benjamin Henry Day. He ignited his own press revolution in 1830s. The newspapers did exist back in the days, but not the type we're used to see today. The target audience were well-off, educated people from the urbanized areas. The average cost was close to $2.50 nowadays currency, so technically it was relatively affordable. But don't forget, they were released only several times a month, and it was necessary to pay in advance, while back then the ordinary citizens earned much less than nowadays. Well, judge for yourself what an ordinary worker will choose. A few pounds of meat or information about all the business events in the city that he doesn't even understand. And it turned out that the newspapers were read by the economic and political elite of the city. Yes, those were influential people, but they're not offering you general audience coverage, and therefore money, without demanding much in return except for interesting content. Well, Benjamin Day was the first to realize that it is exactly those millions of people who were not very wealthy, but who had a potential to deliver millions of dollars. But how? They cannot afford to buy a subscription to the newspaper even for a month. So Day started selling his newspapers below its production cost. One such issue of the New York Sun cost only a cent. So where did the profit come from? It's simple. In the DEA's business model, the commodity was not newspaper, but people who read those newspapers. Benjamin added in the advertising and promotion section into each issue. In the 19th century, the understanding of marketing didn't exist, at least the way we know it today. Benjamin Day took the initiative and began filling in the newspaper with advertisements unbeknown to the very business themselves. Just so that every shop, tavern, and every soap factory in the city would know that this is the way forward. That now it could be and should be done this way. To minimize costs, they initially did everything themselves. He was the owner, the publisher, the editor, and the courier. A one-stop shop. Day's second revolutionary idea was his content. He knew his readers well, which is why he made sure to write in a way that would be interesting to the broadest audience possible. They focused on evoking emotions. There he had an article about how a man couldn't stand his divorce and caused trouble. Another one was about a murderer who escaped punishment due to connections with someone influential. And here is a very emotional piece about why slavery is evil. Moreover, not because the newspaper owner was some kind of high moral person. His newspaper, the New York Sun, did not support any specific party or value system. It was merely a weathercock, sensing which way the wind was blowing, what was closer to ordinary people. The reader is always right. So let's give the readers only what they want in terms of emotions. Classic populism. The approach worked. Within a year, the penny newspaper, known as penny press, circulated 5,000 copies daily. It might seem like a small number, just 2.5% of the city's population, but that was enough to make it the most popular publication in the city. The advertising-based financial model worked. New York Sun immediately became very profitable. There was just one problem. Day's competitors realized that nothing stopped them from doing business the same way. To stay afloat, something extraordinary had to be done. And Day came up with the idea. In August 1835, an article titled "Great Astronomical Discoveries" appeared in the New York Sun. Well, and what wasn't it? Sensational claims that life was found on the moon, as well as the seas, huge trees, and some living creatures with wings. Another newspaper issue which generated astronomical revenue was about Batman. After about the sixth such newspaper edition, about the great discoveries of the astronomy, New York Sun was purchased by every 10th resident of the city. The newspaper became the bestseller publication in the world. What is the moral of this story? Well, they made the newspaper industry the way we have known it all these years. Massive circulation, mega popularity of tabloids, provocative headlines, a constant focus on sensationalism, and lots of advertising. They proved that being scandalous and sharp is not a vice, and that the product is not the newspaper itself, but the attention of readers. At that time, no one realized the scale of this media revolution. Almost a century and a half later, in 1975, social researcher Herbert Simon finally noted, "Attention has turned into a new economic resource." We now live not only in an economy of money, but also in an economy of attention, where businesses are in a desperate struggle for our time to make money from it. People have gained free time. To some, it became quite abundant. This is thanks to the regulated workday and a boss who went on a business trip, yada, yada, yada. After the ban on child labor, children and adolescents gained even more free time. And when individuals want to distract themselves from work, from study, from household chores, the gears of business start turning around us. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Before we move forward, let's watch a clip.
Can you believe what's possible these days? Conversations through your computer, worlds of information one click away. All the things you find only on the world's most popular internet online service, now more affordable than ever. It's like living in the future. The future, now available on America Online.
This is advertisement for American Online, or AOL. This commercial was released some 26 years ago. This was in those ancient times when the internet was accessed through dial-up modems. Pay attention to what exactly AOL's advertising focuses on. The main thing that gives you access to the network is the ability to be in touch with anyone, wherever a person is, basically. Advertisers knew perfectly well which emotional buttons to press on. By the end of the 20th century, entire Western world has finally realized that it is being consumed by a loneliness epidemic. Conversations about loneliness started a long time ago. Philosopher Emil Durkheim, the father of sociology, wrote about the total isolation of people back in the late 19th century. At that time, he used the term anomie while describing a state of collapse of social norms, connections, total disunity, and crisis of values. The old norms are outdated, while the new ones have not yet appeared. Instead, there is a vacuum. As a result, people began to feel powerless and not in control of what was happening around. The processes that Durkheim described 130 years ago are still present. On the contrary, urbanization continued. In place of 3-story houses, the 33-floor apartment blocks have emerged, and we often don't even know the names of our neighbors. It's especially relevant here in Hong Kong. How about the family structure? People deliberately get married much later in life. The number of marriages per 1,000 people dropped by half, or even 3 times the rate it was 50, 60 years ago. Only 4% of female and 2% of male get married before 20. Why is that? We will discuss this later. Let's just keep this in mind for now. Finally, work arrangement. Well, despite majority of us having a fixed 8-hour working day, although some shift works might require a commitment to 10 or 12 hours, work nowadays consumes much more than that, given accessibility of work emails on our portable devices and constant urge to check for any updates, proverbial FOMO. This already impacts maintaining healthy relationships, friendships, and real-time social connections. So when the internet era emerged, many thought, well, here it is, the magic pill that will cure the epidemic of loneliness. The first social networks was created long before Zuckerberg's Facebook, Meta. One of the companies that wanted to connect all people was earlier mentioned AOL, both a provider and a place for people to communicate with those who were never even met in our real lives. People in those years were inexperienced. AOL captivated everyone with its simple, anonymous chat. A place where one could find a virtual soulmate or tell someone anonymously to go fly kite. The real genius of AOL became their email service. And in the 90s, it was seen prestigious and not so easy to have your own email account. E-accounts were issued either by universities or companies for employees. In AOL, they quickly realized that this can be leveraged on. And while competitors were pushing postal services, AOL has made the email service completely free. And even even back then, people noticed how addictive email checking has become. Very quickly, students, scientists, and office workers started checking their emails not only during office hours, but rather every 5 minutes, similar to how we check notifications on our phones today. Such impulsive behavior is triggered by a simple cognitive mechanism. Psychologist Frederick Skinner discovered it when he conducted his famous experiments with pigeons. Skinner's pigeons. So he took a bird, put it in the box, and depending on the behavior of a bird, he would either reinforce its behavior or punish it. While, for example, a pigeon packs the red button and will be rewarded with food. If a bird deviates, it will receive a small dose of electric shock. Skinner remarked that if you constantly and consistently encourage desired behavior, the pigeon will quickly learn not only to pack a button, but even play ping pong. This is what Skinner called constant reinforcement, when positive behavior is rewarded with something good. You behave in a right manner, you get your reward. But there is one problem with this. If you stop encouraging a pigeon, it immediately stops obeying you. And this can be solved by constant reinforcement. And as surprising as it might sound, non-constant reinforcement works even better than constant reinforcement. Skinner found that animals rejoice in the reward much more if it is not constant and predictable. That the best way to get a bird hooked is not by offering food every time it packs the red button, but rather reward it once every 10-15 dabs, or even do so randomly with each 10th or 12th or 15th pack. It's exactly with this impermanence and unpredictability that the feeling of joy would increase. Emotions from such rewards will be much more amplified and felt much more acutely. This is exactly why a pigeon is more motivated to behave in a certain way and peck at the button with greater excitement around the clock. The bird knows that even if the food reward doesn't get delivered instantaneously, it will be at some point. What we learned about pigeons helped us to better understand the mechanism of human behavior. This mechanism can be observed everywhere. Look at the fishermen who wait patiently for a bite, or the football fans waiting for the championship. Look at the shopaholics who spend hours scrolling through marketplaces in search of the very thing. The ludomaniacs who lose fortunes in a casino hoping that this time they will definitely win. Constant phone or message checking, newsfeed scrolling is based on that exact same principle. AOL knew this mechanism really well, so they did everything for such behavior patterns to be formed and reinforced. The habit of checking letters. For example, a pleasant voice would notify the account owner every time he or she receives a new message.
You've got mail.
And just a decade later, Zuckerberg's social network finally emerged. So what tools were used to grab our attention here? Firstly, they, of course, adopted and amplified all successful methods in the formation of permanent associations. For example, Pavel Durov adopted this famous sound for his Telegram messenger, not just randomly, but by setting up rigorous competition among sound designers. Secondly, social networks started targeting a new audience, or rather a subclass. Those who desired more than a simple email message exchange. The social network created a phenomenon of self-presentation. The network users started thinking of ways to present themselves in the most flattering way to create certain impressions within the network space. And the greatest advantage of the social network is that we can control the environment and influence others how to think about us. This is how the concept of social media accounts was born. I'm pretty sure you met those who are very docile and nerdy in real life, yet their social media profiles might be a real hair raiser. Social media feed became a public square for personal performance, where our subscribers are the audience. And what would be the tool for the audience's approval? Likes, comments, reposts? The co-founder and first director of Facebook, Sean Parker, very quickly realized how these reactions affect our psyche. We give users a dopamine hit once in a while. Someone liked or commented on your photo post. It doesn't matter. You can choose who sees this content. You choose your audience, but more often than not, we're being picked as an audience. This is because to follow, like, and comment is much easier and effortless than to create. Social networks achieved one main goal. They subjugated our attention and hence the entire social media economy. The total revenue of the 10 largest social networks for 2024 is about $330 billion. This is more than the GDP of Portugal or Kazakhstan. And let's recollect why the social networks were created. To overcome loneliness? What came of this noble mission? Well, paradoxically, social networks led us to isolation, simply because these tools have not been able to replace face-to-face communication, at least among those who remember a world without social networks. It turned out that the loneliest children are those who have minimal communication offline and most of it online. Perceived feelings of loneliness among such kids was even higher than among those who did not communicate either in person or via social networks. At the same time, the number of real non-virtual friends is on a decline. Scientists found out that in the 90s, 1/3 of Americans had 10 or more friends. 30 years later, we saw a threefold decrease. The number of people who have no friends at all, on the contrary, has tripled. And even though social networks erased the geographical boundaries and connected people globally, yes, we are drifting away from each other. But how is this possible? The thing is, it is not the number of social connections that matters to people, but the feeling that we have them. That is, social networks definitely expand your number of contacts. But what social networks cannot guarantee at all is the depth of connections with this exact people. Getting a like or a reaction on a story from a friend is not the same as meeting a real friend in a cafe and just talking heart to heart. Okay, we understood that 10 years ago, but since then, our attention has moved even more from offline to online. Well, I don't want to sound like a nagger, but simply because I am, just like many of you sometimes get lost in relentless newsfeed scrolling or shorts, reels, binge watching. This new reality has come so quickly that we did not have time to reflect on it. We can safely conclude that internet didn't help us in defeating loneliness or connecting to one another in a more meaningful ways. But we managed to achieve something else: boredom and dullness. Let's imagine you are a real Viking and live in 10th century. Contrary to myth, you wouldn't need to engage in robbery, violence, or taming dragons. You would most likely have been living a very simple and boring life of a farmer. Somewhere from April to May, you'd plow the fields for days on end until November, and then for 6 months do nothing in the cramped, cloud, and dark house. You wouldn't be able to read books or play video games. Maybe just a little gambling, some decorative hobby like wood carving, drinking alcohol, and non-stop chatters. An ordinary person without education, wealth, and basic literacy was simply bored most of the time. People put up with boredom literally for thousands of years before technology and principles of capitalism emerged. As you can imagine, human boredom created a huge money-making business. One character in our today's story stands out: William Bernbach, the main advertiser of the 20th century, in many ways surpassing Bernays himself. Bernbach spearheaded the driver for people's attention and declared war on cookie. Let's look at two of his most famous media companies. The first one was an advertising campaign for the Orbeck store, a modest boutique in an ordinary area of Manhattan. It was his poster that made him a high fashion store at low prices. The advertising campaign sparked a mini revolution. Everything here is wonderful. Firstly, everything looks incredibly stylish. Secondly, this is the first successful marketing case. And importantly, the ad skillfully played on what other marketers feared. Bernbach advertised the store for the poor, not the rich. In the story of the ad, the heroine named Juan barely makes ends meet, yet always looks impeccably stylish. How does she manage that? Well, she shops at Orbeck's, a store that is cheap but super stylish. The imitation or replica gives you the main sense of self. And what do others think about it? And what will fashion industry professionals say about the quality of your dress's stitching? Who cares? The main thing is how you feel. This was the feeling Bernbach started selling. He used the key principle of the attention framing. That is, how we tell something can be more important than what we say. It could be said that this store is an ordinary shop for the urban poor, but it can also be presented in such a way that its clients are the smartest clientele in New York who know how to look impeccably well while spending only a few pennies. He used the same trick when advertising the Volkswagen's Beetle. Tiny and, in the eyes of Native Americans, an ugly little bug on wheels that would obviously lose if compared to big, powerful, and daring cars which were in fashion. So, how to make Americans buy this seemingly unattractive product? Here again, Bernbach used framing. He did not try to hide the basic quality of the car, but notice the advertising campaign delivery and angle. Minimalist design, heaps of empty space, practicality and affordability, and description. Think small, that is, think about small things. A short text at the bottom explained how convenient it is to park such a compact Beetle, what could be the fuel consumption, and in general, how cool it is to own such a small car. Well, it is believed that it was Bernbach who launched the creative revolution in advertising. He showed that advertising and entertainment do not interfere with each other, but rather complement each other. And this idea was soon adopted at the television. Most of us still remember what the MTV letters stand for, the main music channel of the 80s and the 90s. But do you know how ingenious was their business model? Well, it is essentially a music channel that shows music videos. The channel obviously needs music. Music costs money, and you have to pay for it. But surprise, surprise, we have musicians who want fame. Musicians are signed to labels that hold all the rights to the music. And the owners of these labels want to make money from their artists, right? But for this, their music videos need to be shown on music channels. This is where the interests of the music business and MTV converged. MTV received music videos for free or for small nominal fees from the labels and aired them around the clock. Musicians became famous and labels made money from them. The channel aired videos for pennies and did not spend on expensive and extensive production, and people happily watched this content and asked for more. In addition to continuously airing commercial music, MTV also showed regular advertisement, reselling viewers attention. Well, pay attention to this. MTV was a cable channel for a long time, so there are viewers who paid money themselves to watch ads. At first, MTV's business model was barely successful. The channel was on the verge of actually being shut down. The coverage wasn't too broad, but then the advertising campaign, I Want My MTV, was launched. The channel brought together all the stars of the era, from Mick Jagger to Sting and Madonna. Musicians in short and catchy videos asked the audience to help them with a very simple message. And it worked. People began to voluntarily advertise a third-party brand and put pressure on cable operators simply because Madonna asked them to. And why did they do this? Well, this is manifestation of the principle of authority. Behavioral psychology tells us that if a KOL or simply a charismatic person asks you to do something, it would have a greater effect as compared to, let's say, an ordinary person. We want to please such KOLs because we see him or her as a role model. And so the advertising quickly won the war of attention. However, with the advent of the internet era, the television monopoly on entertainment began to crumble. And the culprit for this is defined in 3 letters. UGC, or user-generated content. Videos of dancing kids, ridiculous cats, hamsters began to reclaim viewers' attention from big businesses. By now, the focus of content and attention is ordinary people, bloggers, influencers, and platforms that have themselves become information aggregators. You don't need 20-30 editors, content creators, PR officers anymore to succeed. You yourself now can show your own or others people cute cats or what special you have for breakfast to generate likes and at the same time advertise a pet store or cereal box. And the further we go, the more we see all this insane amount of information that is pouring down on us, not only from TV channels but aggregator sites, and literally from every digital outlet, destroying our ability to think. There is a growing fear of what lies ahead of the future generations, total intellectual degradation. And it is necessary to understand the following. Right now, science has not direct evidence that gadgets with terabytes of content have an adverse effect on our cognition, our memory, attention, speech, and other basic brain functions. Well, there is a study done by Microsoft in 2015 where they surveyed 2,000 people and found that the duration of concentration had decreased over 15 years from 12 seconds to 8, which is 1 second less than that of a goldfish. What we can safely assume is that gadgets have made us much more vulnerable to boredom response. For a modern person, a smartphone is a working tool, a means of communication, and the main resource of entertainment. In addition, people use their smartphones to, stay relevant and be on the same wavelengths with the rest of the world. The principle of social proof is at work here. If many people do and approve of something, it means their choice is correct. You begin to constantly compare yourself to others. Following their outstanding life events, you realize you don't measure up. Another well-known psychological concept is related to this, the FOMO, or fear of missing out. It can be a new trend, a piece of news, something that others know, or something that you could potentially find out. Moreover, it may be a completely useless thing, invaluable knowledge, but you strive not to miss it. Hypersensitive people and those with less satisfaction with life will be more likely to worry about missing the next news or an important trend, hence will become less valuable as a member of society. Such individuals are afraid that they will not be aware of what everyone else is up to date with. On the one hand, it is also curiosity that drives innate desire to stay up to date. So you act as that curious person all the time who constantly updates their firmware. You're afraid that if you're out of the loop, people will find you boring and won't engage with you. You will miss all the beauty of life. And there are countless users who are both afraid and curious at the same time. From research statistics, we do not know how many such individuals there are in total. What we do know for sure is that their sleep is disturbed as a result. Sleep is degrading. Scientists from Scotland found that teenagers with FOMO go to bed later because they can't fall asleep due to overstimulation of the nervous system, and as a result, their sleep quality decreases. That's not surprising. Our anxiety has long been a tool for making money. To spur the demand of the audience, we need to find an effective incentive, right? So one of such most famous incentives is the time limit. When the sellers say, the discount in this beautiful limited edition lipstick is valid only until midnight. In behavioral economics, this is called the loss aversion. It was first described by the social psychologists Kahneman and Tversky. The principle is very simple. Frustration from the loss is always sharper than from an acquisition. Well, for example, if we, God forbid, drop a $100 banknote on the street, we will suffer more intensely and acutely in that case than we would rejoice if we found the same value banknote. That's why businesses, when fighting for our attention, hit on the pain points of anxiety, sadness, and pain. And they have been doing this for a very long time. 100 years ago, people in the United States began to rapidly gain wealth, started to eat a lot of sweets, but would rarely brush their teeth. The result of this sugar boom was an epidemic of cavities. At some point, oral hygiene became almost a national threat. However, it was not the authorities that got Americans to brush their teeth, but rather a man named Claude Hopkins. His story is very important to understand how the concept of attention economics works. So, one day, Claude was visited by a comrade who at the time launched his toothpaste brand, Pepsodent. The new brand launch appeared to be a challenging task. No one back then knew that teeth needed to be cared for twice a day, that the right toothpaste and even dental floss needs to be picked. Hopkins was tasked to create a massive nationwide advertising campaign in exchange for a small portion of company shares. And so he started digging into books on dentistry. But then, a stroke of genius. He saw an article about dental plaque. If you run over your teeth with your tongue now, you will probably have a sensation of a film covering your teeth, especially if you have not brushed your teeth in the past 5 or 6 hours. Have you checked? Well, congratulations. You've taken the bait of Claude Hopkins. Here is a poster from the beginning of the 20th century. Run your tongue over your teeth. Can you feel the film? You need irium, a tooth cleaning substance that is only found in the Pepsodent. Hopkins knew that people would not check what is irium, but what he did understand is that people would check whether they would have any plaque on their teeth. And of course, they will start worrying. And who is supposed to solve this problem? That's right, his toothpaste. It was an incredible success. Thanks to Hopkins' efforts, the percentage of people who brushed their teeth regularly increased from 7 to 70%, and the main beneficiary was the brand of toothpaste. Over time, the public, of course, became more savvy and sophisticated, and then they realized that businesses were profiting from their fears. Skepticism peaked in the 60s, when it became fashionable to criticize capitalism and consumer culture. At rallies in those years, not only slogans for women's rights, socialism, and other leftist values were heard, but also phrases like "down with corporations and consumerism." Students who had read philosophers like Herbert Marcuse and Jean Badrius, of course, said, "The cult of consumption replaces everything human in us. People buy things thinking it makes them happier, but it doesn't." Well, we buy things which we sometimes can't even afford. We often use our credit cards for such purchases and then spend years working off the debt, only to take another loan for another thing, which also won't bring us happiness. And thus, people gradually became slaves to their materialistic desires. The only way out is to give up consumption and the values imposed on them by friendly alliances of the state and corporations. Philosophers, postmodernists have badly smeared the reputation of brands. But guess what? The fleeting criticism made them, in the end, only stronger. The revolution was launched by Pepsi. Initially a cheap alternative to Coca-Cola, it was Pepsi marketing team who realized that even the counterculture protest against consumption is for sale. And instead of trying to resist this, you need to tag along with it. Only young people were filmed in the advertising. Not boring, well-fed people, but bold, bright, open, and cheerful youth, just like you. The one who has a long, exciting life ahead of them. And Pepsi had a lot to offer. Do you understand now how it worked? The business has appropriated the spirit of youthful, rebellious energy. Pepsi sold people the ideals of youth and freedom, and Generation P was excited to buy it. Pepsi began sponsoring graffiti contests, extreme sports, and etc. They even released a game about it. The capitalists managed to sell us the idea of anti-capitalism. And here's another important thing. Criticism of consumer society in the 70s was loud in countries where they truly consumed a lot at the so-called developed nations. Meanwhile, third world countries, and back then these weren't just African countries, but China and India were also considered third world countries. They hadn't even begun to consume en masse. So when corporations discovered huge new markets, the whining of Western philosophers dissolved in new streams of cash. Let's talk about MTV again, which came to Russia, for example, almost 20 years after it was launched in America. And it's teamed up with hip-hop and Pepsi, a powerful triad. If we were toting deeper into this case, we will get back to the problem of loneliness again. And the culture of consumption gave people a sense of belonging. Remember how Harley-Davidson brand united motorcycle fans, or Vans who united skateboarder lovers with their legendary sneakers, and so did Red Bull with extreme sports lovers. Irving Goffman cited Shakespeare, saying that our whole life is a theater with social masks and us being the lead actors in this theater. At the same time, the actors, us, need props. And it doesn't matter whether it is a t-shirt of your favorite brand, a sticker on a laptop, or a patch on your sweatshirt. The main thing is that with these props, we displayed how we are associated with culture and with some kind of community. People don't just want to own brands or simply consume the products. They want to belong or be part of what they consume. Well, this concept may sound ridiculous to some, but it works. Even if it is not applicable to you. If you wear socks and sandals in 2025, congratulations, you're no longer an object of ridicule, but a fashionable person with an eye for the latest trends. Today, big businesses are making full use of this mechanism when appealing to the younger generations, millennials and Zoomers. They, by the way, make up 52% of the planet's population nowadays. And that's not taking into account Generation Alpha, who were born between 2013 and 2024. Combined together, they make up 3/4 of the planet's population. Brands have learned how to exploit our weaknesses. They understand and crash our defense mechanisms perfectly. And we don't mind, because when we consume and when we share with others, we don't just brag and wait for social approval. This is how we interact with the world, and at the same time, we allow others to profit from us. And corporations already figured it out. They know what we love and what we talk about. Hitler's propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels, admitted, "We cannot seize the power or use it without radio and airplanes." In this context, let's talk more about radio. This radio device was developed by the engineer Otto Griesing at the request of Goebbels in 1933, and it became a real hit. Before that, radio in Germany was very expensive, therefore unpopular. However, this device was subsidized by the state, and potential consumer could purchase it for as little as 76 Reichsmark. Then the Nazi came up with even more affordable option. It costs half as much. If necessary, you could buy it on installments. And so, thanks to this device, Hitler and Goebbels entered almost every household in Germany without knocking. By 1941, 66% of the country's homes had such a receiver. And no, contrary to a myth, it was not a 24/7 broadcast of superiority of the Aryan race. Most of the airtime was actually taken up by the entertainment, opera, concerts, like dance music, and even comedy shows. This is how Goebbels prepared Nazi adherents. Entertainment, jokes, funny stories, uplifting music. And at the right moment, bam, lectures on why the Bolsheviks and American bankers are a threat to the world. So basically, it was delivered through the means of cheap entertainment in exchange of attention. In this next section, we will talk about how businesses receive information about us in order to subdue our attention. 70 years ago, it was not easy to measure the rating, to put it mildly. American businessman and market research analyst Arthur Nielsen decided to implement a direct approach. He sent questionnaires to households and asked people to record their observation on the type of TV content they consume. And someone, usually a housewife, sat down in the living room and wrote down who, for how long, and what exactly is watching. For a week of such work, people received $5. Not a bad part-time job. But those who kept television viewing diaries could hardly imagine that the data they were collecting would be worth millions. Nielsen invented a unique tool for monitoring attention. Nowadays, you can effortlessly find out who has how many viewers and subscribers. But back then, television producers and marketers did not know which parts of a program were most interesting to viewers and which ones were seen as boring. So, after having access to this data, they understood which shows should be cut and which ones to be extended, and hence sold more advertising. Then Nielsen came up with another wonder weapon, the local people meter. These were electronic devices that the company placed in the homes of several thousand viewers across the country. With their help, TV producers understood what divorced women over 40 were watching and what 20-year-old students living with their parents were watching, etc. In the digital age, information about us is collected in two ways. The first are independent data brokers. You encounter them every time you visit a website and see the button "Accept our cookie policy." When you click accept, you give your consent. Do whatever you want with my data. I don't mind. The type of data that is collected about you is extremely diverse. Your location, the type of apps you have on your phone, the type of information you search for in a search engine. There are a bunch of trackers on the websites, which you can't refuse or you simply can't bypass. Data brokers would have successfully traded data and made decent money on it, but then they were forced out by a giant competition, the big tech corporations such as Google, Apple, Amazon. These giants know you're inside out. It was a huge scandal when it became known that Amazon's smart speakers listen to their users. The company conducts an in-depth analysis of your activity and even your appearance. Biometric data is collected using the deep face systems. This is an analog of the Face ID from Zuckerberg. Well, what can we say about such trivial things like the types of posts you like and the comments you leave? Well, Mark Zuckerberg and his colleagues in the industry successfully trade such data and earn no longer just on advertising, but on user information. Businesses buy up our data in terabytes in order to then make as much money as possible on us. But just collecting data isn't enough. You also need to be able to bypass our psychological barriers. We, unlike the TV viewers and radio listeners from the 40s, we consume much more information and see a great deal of commercials. Therefore, we have developed the so-called banner blindness. Even the most creative advertisements are often seen by us like white noise. But the specialists found a solution to handle the banner blindness. They began conducting research and experiments to understand where and what people look at when they hold a smartphone in front of them or look at a monitor screen. User experience designers, people who figure out how to make it easier for you to get what you want from a website or app, and how to draw your attention to what you need. And when we talk about user experience, we mean when, where, why, and how people use a product. Most of the web developers and designers use Daniel Kahneman's psychological methods, which explain how we choose clothes and other goods in the supermarket, how do we add them into our cart or read news on websites. There are several key principles. We need limitations because if there are no boundaries, then it is not clear what to do at all. We get overwhelmed. It's easier for us to navigate among understandable symbols that evoke very clear association. That is, we need to understand that a person seeing our symbol immediately understands its meaning. Intuitiveness is another key principle because according to Kahneman, we are quite often driven by our intuitive system when it comes to making decisions, as it is less energy intensive as compared to, let's say, a rational system. The less complex your website or your application, the better. It is easier for the user to navigate around it. And of course, not to mention known designers' life hacks such as bright colors and familiar interface with which a user navigates. We're pleased to follow the template because we respond better to something that feels familiar. However, if there is no novelty at all, it depresses us. That's why we need surprises. They can be small, as they shouldn't completely change the picture of perception, but at the same time, they can uplift our mood. Let's take a literal example. Something freezes on our browser, something goes wrong. And we don't see the frozen white screens stating error 404, God forbid. But if instead we see some funny picture and the inscription, "Oops, something went wrong," we immediately feel some sort of human touch. If you are an experienced web designer and developer, you already know how the right font, color, text positioning affects the user's comprehension. But most of us are mere consumers. We need to understand these algorithms and principles and how it works. "Oops, something went wrong" is much better than just showing error 404. The race for attention capturing happened long before the design of websites and applications as it happened on television. Meet Ted Turner, the creator of CNN. Before CNN, every news show looked like this. The editors would prepare a 20-minute segment, broadcasted live or recorded, and then go off to prepare a new one. Meanwhile, something else would be on air, a series, an interview. But Turner created the world's first 24-hour news channel. At first, no one took the idea seriously. Who in their right mind would want to watch the news 24 hours a day? And when nothing is happening, would the anchors be, napping on air? The skeptics were wrong. CNN is in crisis now, but in the late 1990s and 2000s, they became the golden mean of news television worldwide. What's Turner's secret? Well, he was the first to exploit the addiction to anxiety and bad news. In the era of internet, it became known as doom scrolling. When something bad happens in the world, you turn to relentless news reading and get lost there for hours. You absorb every bit of information on the subject. For many, this has become a bad habit. Some people turn to smoking or compulsive stress eating to cope, while others start scrolling through bad news. CNN has harnessed this human addiction to anxiety. It turns out that people, even if this is not their job, are willing to constantly consume news. And the more worrying, the more sensational a piece of news is, the better. And people want to turn on such news channels and be in the loop of what's happening, or constantly check such Twitter, X, or Telegram channels where one can access information even faster. Back in the 70s, psychologists discovered the so-called mean world syndrome, a cognitive bias when people perceive the world as more dangerous than it really is. There is a direct correlation here. The more news is consumed by an individual, the more it feels that he or she is being persecuted. Digital platforms also play a huge role in installing in such addiction. Attention capturing methods work here in a more cunning way than a primitive appeal to fear and anxiety. I'm talking about, of course, recommendation algorithm. It is believed that the first algorithms were implemented not by YouTube or TikTok, but by Amazon. Back in the early 2000s, Bezos Marketplace offered buyers a section which was called "People Also Bought This Product." This encouraged users to spend more time on the site and spend more money, only to return for more. Perhaps the most famous but no less astonishing case involves Target, one of the largest retailers in the United States. Some 13 years ago, their algorithms learned to detect pregnancy and predict the birth dates of their customers' children. They studied purchase data and identified a pattern. Those customers who had recently given birth had purchased similar products 9 months earlier. In the first 15 weeks, they heavily rely on vitamins. By the second trimester, they actively buy unscented lotions, and so on. Target decided to take preventative action. Using big data, they were able to determine which customers were currently pregnant, how far along they were, and when they were expecting their baby. And then they started sending customers coupons for baby products based on their calculated pregnancy dates. The accuracy was astonishing. Sometimes Target employees found out about their customers' pregnancy before their families did. One day a man came running into their office because his daughter had received a coupon for a crib via the postal service. The man was furious. Are you f***ing nuts? My daughter is in high school. What kids are you talking about? Well, the target manager could only shrug. A few days later, the man called them to apologize, saying that he hadn't realized his daughter was expecting a child actually. And pregnancy was just the tip of the iceberg. Using Facebook likes alone, Cambridge and Microsoft researchers have learned to determine everything about a person. Literally everything. Skin color, age, IQ, relationships, preferences, whether they like alcohol or sports, and of course, political views. The accuracy of these predictions range from 65 to 95%. All this knowledge, of course, is then used to provide personal recommendations. YouTube has been exploiting these principles in the past 8-10 years. The game changer was the artificial neural network. YouTube deploys two such principles. One selects hundreds of suitable videos, and the other pushes them for a specific person. The neural network takes into account everything you like now, what you liked 2 years ago, how outdated the video is, what you're used to watching at specific time of the day, podcasts, historical episodes, or interviews. Maybe you have recently arranged digital detox. YouTube knows all this too, and the algorithms will do everything to keep your attention. This works for both the platform and the channels. The vast majority of our views come from YouTube showing you the video on your home screen or in the sidebar recommendations. YouTube has achieved this by making audiences unwilling to learn about videos from anywhere else. That's why 98% of traffic comes from within the platform, not from shares or reposts on other social networks. Only TikTok is more powerful than YouTube's algorithms. Their programmers have achieved a miracle whose success no one has yet been able to basically replicate. And although TikTok videos are shorter than those of YouTube, on average, people spend just as much time there, if not more. This is all thanks to the infinite feed, which, unlike regular YouTube videos, has no end. And then everyone else tried to implement this short-form video model. And if you think about it, it's amazing. Before you start watching this video, you made a conscious choice. But feeds with short vertical videos don't have that. Algorithms decide for you what you will watch. Well, unless you are checking your subscription feed, but it doesn't happen as often. Most people watch recommendations. And while we are surfing the content, our video viewing data will be sold to someone. And the platform's smart algorithms will keep us as long as possible. Now, what should people understand about social networks? They encourage those mechanisms that keep us coming back for more. Their business model is dependence. However, there are heroes among us. This young man, his name is Tristan Harris. He founded a startup which was then acquired by Google. Ever since his time at Stanford, Tristan noticed something strange. In his curriculum, no one talked about the negative effects technology might have on humans. And so, at Google, he dealt with the ethics of design that is making this whole process of trading attention at least somewhat ethical. He was one who launched the movement against digital addiction. It all started with an internal presentation of 141 slides explaining why people's attention has to be respected. He emphasized that the tech giants have such responsibilities. Harris's movement caused quite a stir, but Google's management never listened. And not only because everyone there is utterly evil and a fan of digital surveillance, no, it's more complicated than that. The thing is, we simply don't fully know whether the internet gadgets and media are truly addictive. It's like with the cognitive skills. At first it seems that everything is obvious, but once you dig deeper, it turns out that there is no unifying consensus that internet addiction exists and it is negative. Different works offer varying outcomes. For example, if you take away a phone from a 15-year-old for 24 hours and the next day ask, "Well, my friend, was it hard for you?" The answer will be obviously yes, as the teenagers' phones have their friends, social media, music, the entire universe there. But is it an addiction, or for those who do not know life without the digital bubble, the line between physical and virtual has been erased? But it is clear that the feeling of digital detox is literally described by young people as if they were addicts. There is a withdrawal syndrome, which is devastating. We consume enormous amounts of information. My personal screen time on average is more than 7 hours. Virtually any smartphone nowadays can provide you such stats, and it's terrifying. And this is not taking into account phenomenon of multi-screening. This is when you, say, watch football on one monitor, while at the same time putting together a work presentation on the second, and then have a smartphone or tablet in front of you where they check what's new on Telegram or on IG feed. So the main question remains, what are we supposed to do with all of this? Personal overdrive. The feeling of loneliness, which social media network promised us to cure, has not been resolved. The divisions over politics, vaccination, traditional values have become chasms. We're not even given a chance to get bored, but this abundance of content sometimes makes us want to escape to the wilderness, but even there we're unlikely to feel better. All this triggered a quiet wave of protest. There are people who don't want their attention to be torn to pieces. Some parents fundamentally raise their children without tablets and smartphones. This is also known as no-screen parenting. Influencers sell detox tours to solve their problems. However, studies have shown that such trips have low efficacy in restoring psycho-emotional balance. At the same time, we see a rising trend in replacing the smartphones with the dumb phones or feature phones that have no social networks or games. The basic features include calling and sending a text message. Banner blindness, which we have already touched upon, has reached incredible proportions. Ask any marketer. Getting people's attention has become very difficult and expensive. Therefore, attention-grabbing tools are becoming increasingly more sophisticated. Paying for advertising spot becomes less and less effective or profitable. The business that once dominated our attention has a big problem now, and it will only get worse. Zoomers and alphas are much more technically savvy compared to older generations. They no longer have banner blindness, but advertising deafness and advertising nihilism. Young people remain cynical as brands try to play along the agenda and come up with situational marketing in order to get into or to create some sort of hot trend. However, there is still one tool that is thriving and remains relevant nowadays: influencers or KOL marketing. That is when an advertiser approaches a KOL and integrates its ad into then content feed of such celebrity. They essentially rent the attention of loyal followers of such media personality. You might be surprised, but here we are again, picking up the trail of MTV. In 1991, they aired the first episode of The Real World. MTV cut its music video airtime and started broadcasting adult, but still youth-oriented animation like Beavis and Butthead. But The Real World completely changed the game. It was a show about 20-something placed in a single loft in New York, and it instantly became a hit. Not only was it a full 10 years before the launch of Big Brother, but the people on it openly tackled all youth-related topics without any fakeness. Subjects like sex, addiction, HIV, and relationships. But the main reason everyone loved the show so much was its characters. They were ordinary people, lively and genuine, who were completely unknown before appearing on television. It turned out that watching nobodies could be more interesting than watching primetime stars. Unlike celebrities from the Hollywood Hills, you could actually empathize with them. Mass communication psychology calls this parasocial relationships. A one-sided bond forms between the viewer and the perceived star, where the fan feels they know almost everything about the blogger. Well, at least that's how it seemed to them. Meanwhile, the star isn't even aware of the other person's experience. As a result, the previously known participants of the show became superstars. This is, by the way, how the Kardashian family got their start, and the whole world found out about Kim. Her infamous tape had an impact, of course, but the reality show had a stronger one. Social media has brought stars closer to us than any telescope ever could. Today, major brands simply can't afford not to work with famous bloggers. Some choose influencers with millions of followers, while in other cases, it's more effective to go with bloggers who literally only have thousands of subscribers, because their audience trusts them more and is perhaps more solidly united around them. And last, but certainly not least, the bloggers aren't fools either. They know a lot about their audience. One of the top YouTubers of our time, Mr. Beast, has nearly 500 million subscribers on YouTube alone. For 5 years, he studied the laws of viral content, and after that, he derived a formula for a hit. A template you can use to make videos that are guaranteed to get views and keep the viewer watching until the end. But even for a mega successful blogger like him, a success formula can't work forever. The reason is the same why people began developing banner blindness. People get tired of worn-out repetitions and, first and foremost, often endlessly positive agendas. Yes, you've heard that right. The positive agenda. South Korean philosopher and cultural theorist Byung-Chul Han came up with a very concise term for this. In his book, The Burnout Society, he wrote that people are tired of perfect, polished idols and unrealistic expectations. All of this leads the public to burnout and mental health issues. But still, despite this quiet protest, no one has stopped fighting for our attention. For every outdated technique, 2 new ones immediately appear, and people don't adapt to them right away, which means these new techniques have time to work on people. Calls for digital ethics haven't led to much either. Tristan Harris, who caused the scandal at Google trying to make things more ethical, ended up leaving. He now gives lectures, appears on podcasts, and works on various public committees. But moving the corporations has proven impossible, at least for now. Especially since social media platforms and contextual advertising services continue to earn many times more money from ads than individual influencers who have to trade on their own faces. How will all this influence our attention and behavior in the coming years? Well, scientists from Cambridge can help us here. They say a new stage is coming where artificial intelligence will not only sell us goods but will predict our desires and plans before we are even aware of them ourselves, in order to then gently nudge us towards the right choice. Unlike the old model of the attention economy, which worked through banners and ads, the new commodity is our intentions, our internal strivings, goals, and motivations. It doesn't get more intimate than that. The forecast is somewhat frightening. And to wrap this all up, I'll say one thing. In the battle for our attention, which will inevitably continue in the future, we have one important advantage, which is awareness. And sooner or later, it will dawn upon us.